Welcome to Speakeasy for Sport. Our guest today, Daniel Pink, is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, To Sell is Human, Drive, Win, and his latest, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backwards Moves Us Forward. He also teaches a master's class on sales and persuasion, and we are excited to bring Daniel Pink to our show. Daniel, how are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm really excited about this. I've been giving your book, The Power of Regret, to all of my coaches around the country who've been on these forced sabbaticals and they're waiting for their next opportunity. I feel like it's a great time to look backwards in order not to make the mistakes. And I thought your book summed it up great. Congratulations on another great book.
Hey, thanks. And I guess it sounds like I owe you some royalties too for these recommendations. Yeah.
No, you know what? This is a fun part about being a coach, is being able to share the things that you're learning with other people. And, through the years, and we'll talk a little bit about Drive and some of the other things. Through the years, I've used a lot of your resources to really move our teams forward, move our programs forward. And so again, it's an honor to be able to have you on here today.
That's awesome to hear. I'm glad to hear that. I'm not an athlete, but I am a sports fan. So when I hear from people who are athletes and real sports folks, I do love it. I have your listeners who have the good fortune of not having to look at us, because we're talking on a video right now. We'll see behind me is somewhere in there is a cap that I got from a player who signed from a player on the Miami Dolphins, who said he read the book and it helped him become a better offensive lineman.
I believe it. I believe it.
So that's awesome. That keeps me in the writing business for a couple more days.
Well, I think what's beautiful about it is you do so much research, and everyone talks in sports about analytics and data and what a big thing it is now. And you do the same thing with your books. And then when you come in and you support it with an idea or belief, it's really easy and it resonates easily to a person who's used to understanding and looking into data.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate your saying that, because I do really try to do an enormous amount of research. And I've actually never made that analogy, Jamion, to analytics. And I think that to sports analytics. And I think one of the things that you see in sports analytics is that when you look at the facts, when you look at the research, sometimes it proves your intuition's right, and sometimes it proves it wrong. And it's like, whatever the outcome is like, go with what the evidence says. If you're going based on, a certain kind of ideology about how you should coach basketball or how you should manage a baseball team, you're not gonna do very well. And if you go based on, hey, you know what, in this, the classic example now is how football teams don't punt too often on fourth down. Yeah. Except for our mutual colleague, or your friend and my colleague, my Northwestern colleague, Pat Fitzgerald, who actually goes for it on fourth down more than most football coaches, because he's a Northwestern grad, so he can do analytics.
Yeah, the numbers say to go for it between this yardage and
much more than you would think. And if you look at just look at in your career in basketball, just like how much like the 3-pointer has changed things. It's gone from people saying, back when the ABA and the NBA merged, saying that's not real basketball, to people saying, oh, that's just like kind of a gimmick, we can live with it, to it becoming an essential part of the game. And that was driven in part by analytics.
Yeah. The beautiful part about data is now that everyone's going for it on fourth down and everyone's shooting 3-pointers, the data is going to flip at some point, because it's going to say, well, you probably shouldn't go for it as much, or you probably shouldn't shoot as many threes. And that's what I'm really curious to watch when that happens.
I agree with you.
Right now it looks like we should go for it because no one does.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the great things about that strategy. I mean, you saw this thing, and we can get to talking about other things, but this, you followed what's happening at, Grinnell College and their basketball program. They had a game this year where the coach told them to shoot only threes, which seems kind of nuts.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. So when I was at Emory and Henry College, back in 2004 to 2006, an assistant coach, we ran a run and gun system at the same time Grinnell was running this run and gun system. So at the time, Emory and Henry and Grinnell were almost like brother programs doing the same thing. We would talk almost weekly about how we're getting more shots up. We actually had this convention that we created that we would go to. So I'm very familiar with Grinnell basketball. And it's like you said, it's like basketball on steroids. It's like analytics on steroids.
Yeah, and whatever works. I mean, I think there are endless endless numbers of experimentations that you can do. But the point is, I mean, just to steer this back, is that one of the things is that when we make decisions in our work life, when we make decisions in our personal lives, when we make decisions as a coach or a manager, there is a body of evidence out there that we can often draw on. And it's usually wiser to use that body of evidence to make these decisions rather than it is to say, this is how we've always done it, or my instinct is that that we should do X, Y, or Z, or that, when I was growing up, you always did it this way, or we always did it that way. And so the evidence gives us some clues about how to do our work better, but also how to just live better lives.
Yeah, no. And that's what I mean. That's what I think is so great about, again, your stuff is it's really detail driven. You can really picture it. You can see it. What made you want to write a book about regret?
Largely because I had regret. I had regrets of my own, and sort of the impetus actually was. And this is totally not. This is total truthfulness. The setting where I first started thinking about this was a basketball arena. It was not a basketball game, but it was a basketball arena where my elder daughter Sophia was graduating from college. And it's a pretty big school, so we're sitting. Some of the graduation is in this basketball arena, and I'm there, and I'm having. You'll get there. You'll get there eventually, but I'm having this kind of out of body experience because, like, this kid who's 22 years old and is in a cap and gown, I feel like he was just born yesterday. I can. And so that's like, what the hell just happened here? And then what's worse is that. I say, how can I have a 22-year-old kid? I'm like 26, and so there's a lot of waiting, and I'm just kind of in my own head at this transition moment. And I started thinking about some of my own regrets in college. I wish I had worked harder. I wish I had taken more risks. I actually wish, I regret not being a kinder person. I realized that I wasn't as kind as I could have been in college, and that I didn't fully understand the experiences of some of my classmates and things. And anyway, so I came back and I from that graduation, and I knew that nobody wanted to talk about regret.
Yeah.
Because it's like, ooh, no. And I very, very sheepishly mentioned these regrets to a few people who I knew. And I discovered that everybody wanted to talk about regret. That as soon as I mentioned it, it's like the gates fell down, and it's like this gusher of people wanting to talk about this, which is a very interesting reaction for a writer. And so I was actually working on a different book at the time. I put that aside, and I started doing some research on regret and change course like 180 degrees to write a book on this. I don't think that this is a book I would have written. This is not a book I would have written in my 30s, but in my 50s, when I had some mileage on me, it felt in some ways inevitable that I would write this book.
Yeah. How many total people that ended up taking the survey?
Well, right now, so what we did is one of the ways that I investigated this, one of the ways that I accumulated the evidence or the analytics for this was, number one, is looking at about 60 years of science on this emotion in many different fields. I also did a very large public opinion survey of the U.S. population, the biggest public opinion survey ever conducted on U.S. attitudes about regret. Largely to try to get see if there are demographic differences in regret based on things like gender and race and age and whatnot. Relatively few, it turns out. But I also did this other thing where I called the World Regret Survey, where I collected regrets I just invited people around the world to submit a big regret. And right now our database has over 24,000 regrets from people in 110 countries. It's completely bonkers. I mean, it's fascinating, but I never would have expected that. I set that up with the aim of hoping to get several hundred, so that I could have some, and then do some follow-up, so I could have some stories to tell in the book about people's regrets. And it just, I mean, and just all over the world, these regrets come pouring in.
There's two things that there's. Well, the first thing I'll say is, I love how you phrase this in the book. It's like, and I'm not going to get it exact. But by learning about regret, you learn what people value.
Totally.
And it's like you're looking at it a different direction. I love that. And I was like, that really thinking about it made you say, I want to know what my regrets are. I want to write them down. I want to have a full understanding of it. And then secondly, I would say, like, when you're looking at regret, being able to not, obviously you can't change the past, but putting them in the 4 different categories and being able to understand where maybe you're leaning one way more than the other, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jamion, you hit on a really essential point. I mean, like if you had to distill like the core points in this line of research about regret, I mean, one of them would be the fact that everybody has regrets. That regret is utterly common. That if you don't have regrets, chances are there's literally some kind of brain problem. And I'm not joking around about that.
Yeah.
I mean, the only people who don't have regrets are 5-year-olds, people with neurodegenerative diseases, and sociopaths. Everybody else has regrets. We have 50 years of research showing us it's one of the most common emotions that human beings have. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that the reason it's so ubiquitous is because it's useful. That if we treat our regrets properly, we can enlist them to work better and live better, work better, and so forth. But the other point that you're making here, which is really might be the most important thing, is that regret reveals what we value. And let me just double click on that for a moment, because I do think that it might be the single most important point in this line of research. Here's the thing, and here's a way to look at it. If you think about just you, Jamion, or any of your listeners, think about you and I happen to be talking on a Friday. So let's imagine yesterday, Thursday, you made lots of decisions. You took lots of actions yesterday in the course of your life. It's Friday. Most of those decisions and actions you barely remember today. Okay. And that's okay. That's sufficient, right? You don't want to remember and yet there are certain things in our life where decisions or indecisions or actions or inactions from a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or in many cases, 30 years ago, that not only do we remember them, they bug us. They bother us. That's an incredibly strong signal. That is telling you something. Yeah. And in a way, when you look at the sort of the taxonomy of regret, what people actually regret, it gives you, exactly as you're saying, kind of a reverse image of what people want out of life. And so when we think about regret, it clarifies what we value and instructs us on how to do better. That, in essence, is why this emotion is so powerful.
What was I don't want to say one thing. What was something that you didn't anticipate that the research really told you?
Oh, I mean, a few things. I mean, one of them was, getting back to this, how universal the regrets were. We have this database of 24,000 regrets. And what we found is that most of these regrets fit into one of 4 categories. There are things what I call foundation regrets, which are small decisions that people make early that accumulate to bad consequences later. So that's things like I spent too much and saved too little. I didn't exercise or eat right, and now my health is terrible. There are regrets about boldness, where you had a moment in your life where you can take a chance or you can play it safe. And when people don't take the chance, most of them regret it. And that could be everything from starting a business to asking somebody out on a date to traveling. There's moral regrets, which are, if only I'd done the right thing, where people, have a moment where they can either take the high road or take the low road, do the right thing or do the wrong thing. And when they do the wrong thing, most people, most of the time, regret it. And then there are connection regrets, which are, if only I'd reached out, which are about relationships that come apart. You want to reach out, you don't. You think it's going to be awkward. You think the other side's not going to care, and people end up regretting that. And what the amazing thing, just to answer the question more directly, is with that lengthy preface, is how universal these regrets are. If we were to, we could turn your show into a game show in a way, and I could randomly select a regret from the database, beep, read it to you, and you would have to guess where it was from, and I don't think you could do it.
Yeah.
I don't think that you would know in many of these cases whether this regret came from a 41-year-old guy in Richmond, Virginia, or a 61-year-old woman in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or a 28-year-old woman in
Yeah.
Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's that universal.
Yeah, and it was so cool that you would take their voices and you put them in there with where they're from and their first name or whatever. And maybe sometimes they had their nationality or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought it was, like you said, it might be, like you said, 41-year-old woman from Wisconsin, and I might have the same regret.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's just like the ones you would pick out and the ones that are in there were so common that it didn't matter what my skin color was or what my background was growing up, my education. They're just very common.
Exactly. And when we did that's I mean, I'm telling you, we could play that game. You can even see it further. We also have the survey in Chinese, in Mandarin, and we have it in Spanish. And even if you were to take those, translate them, you know, they're remarkably similar. When I did the big public opinion survey, where I asked people about their regrets, and I was looking for demographic differences, really, like sort of analytic. This is truly, data analytics here is looking for demographic differences in people's regrets. There weren't that many. Yeah. There weren't that many differences between men and women. There weren't that many differences between white people and people of color. There were a few differences based on education level. The one area that I think is interesting and probably revealing for coaches is there was one. I spent a lot of time and money on this to look for demographic differences, and I found one. Okay, but it was a big one. And the big demographic difference came on age. And I think it's very revealing. The people in their 20s. If you look at people in their 20s and look at their regrets, about half of them had regrets of action, regrets about what I did, and about half had regrets of inaction, what I didn't do. Look in the 30s, more people with inaction than action regrets. Go to the 40s, way more people with inaction regrets than action regrets. Go to your 50s, shitloads more people with inaction versus action regret. The older you get, it's very, very powerful. It's like, it was so stark that as people age, and not even age all that much, what sticks with them are regrets of inaction, regrets about what they didn't do. When you get to your 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's like a 4-to-1 ratio of inaction regrets to action regrets. That's what sticks with us over time, what we didn't do.
I mean, I guess it says like as we get older and we have more invested, we take less risk.
It could. I think that's part of it. I think that sometimes we can make sense of our action regrets.
Yeah.
So you can say, like, I have a lot of regrets. A lot of them from women, actually. I really regret marrying that idiot, but at least I have these 2 great kids. So you can find the silver lining in it. If you have a moral regret, let's say you've hurt somebody, you can go back and apologize. You can make restitution in some way. But for inaction regrets, you can't do anything. They just stick with people, particularly regrets about not reaching out, particularly regrets about not acting boldly in any realm of life.
It's crazy. Like, in my job, in my life, I've always tried to make really bold decisions. Like, I've always really prided myself on not having a fear. Like, if I think this is what the best thing to do, this is what we're going to do. And that kind of worked for a long period of time. And then it didn't work. Right. And so it's like, you kind of get to the point where you go, oh, this always worked. I mean, always kind of going left and everyone else is going right. It's worked for me so often. And then suddenly you're like, oh, that might not have worked perfectly.
Yeah, but you can't always evaluate it based on whether it worked or not, because sometimes you don't have full control over that.
Well, and that's why I think it's great when you look like, that's why I think the book's so great. Cause it's like, if I hadn't read it, I would have said, man, that was a bad mistake. But now when you look at it through regret, it's like, actually, it could be really valuable. If I can learn all these things along the way.
True.
And I'll never have to look back and say, I didn't try. That's
the most important thing, that part right there. That's the thing that really sticks with people. I have this character in the book. I mean, from reading it, this guy in the book named Bruce, who was on a train in Europe just after graduated from college. This young woman sits down next to him. They immediately have this affinity.
It's a great
They're
story.
laughing, they're holding hands. It's like the greatest day of his life. Just out of the blue, this woman sits in the empty seat next to him, and they have this immediate karmic connection that goes on for hours and hours and hours on this train ride. He's an American guy. She's Belgian. She's working in France. So they're on this train. It's like something out of a movie. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like this guy can't believe he's so lucky. This beautiful woman has sat down next to him, and they are literally holding hands. They met like a few hours ago. They're holding hands as they're riding on the train. She gets to her stop. She has to get off because that's where she lives. That's where her parents live. He says, "I'll go with you." And she said, no, my father will kill me. So he doesn't know. This guy, his name is Bruce. He doesn't know what to do. He, this is in the early 1980s. So there's no internet or anything like that. You can't like give her your text or anything like that. He writes his mother's mailing address in Texas on a piece of paper, rips it off, hands it to her. They kiss. She exits. And then 40 years later, 4 decades later, his big regret is, I always wish I'd step off the train. And so him I interviewed, because among these 24, I gave people who submitted their regrets, I invited them to include their email address if they wanted to do a follow-up interview. And he did. And I interviewed him. And what bugs him, this is the long-winded point that I'm going to make here, is that what bugs him is not so much that his life would have had a different outcome, but that at a moment in that life, he didn't take the shot.
Yeah.
He wimped out. He wasn't bold, and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And so it could have been that he stepped off the train, and after he spent like 2 days with a woman, he says, "Okay, this is like not a good match."
Yeah.
But at least he knows that. But what stuck with him for 40 years is that he didn't step off the train. And that's what really bugs us over time. A lot of times we step off the train and it doesn't go that well for us. We got plenty of people who, here's the thing. There are people in the database who say, I started a business, it totally went south on me, and I regret ever trying to do that. There are some people like that. Yeah. But for every one of those, there are 40 probably. I wish I'd started a business rather than stayed in this lackluster job.
Yeah.
And so it's really the decision itself rather than the outcome that really, 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 really sticks with people.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about the train story is just reading through the entire book, she probably has the same regret.
I don't know. It's interesting. Well, the interesting thing about this, I don't know if your audience will care one way or the other, but sort of like how, like when I would interview people, I spent my life interviewing people. And so you interview people, and then, you get their story, and maybe you interview them again to get the, more facts right or whatever, or third time or fourth time. But in this case, what would happen is I would interview people and they would change their behavior. He would say, God, I haven't talked about this for a while. And he put out, he put out this notice in like Craigslist Paris to try to find her. There's another character in the book whose big regret was that she lost contact with her good friend from college. And, I interviewed her about that. And then finally she said, based on this conversation, I decided to reach out to her. And I'm like, oh, come on. You can't keep changing the story on me. And so, but that shows you just how powerful this emotion is. It sticks with us. But when we make sense of it, we don't ignore it. We don't wallow in it. When we try to confront it, it changes our behavior for the better.
There's something about acknowledging your regret that instantly puts you in an action mode. That's
an interesting point.
When you acknowledge it, like so much of regret is we suppress it. Like I think in the book you'd even say like, well, I'm better for it, but you never really evaluate why you're better for it and why you're worse for it. You just sort of move past it. But when you really evaluate it, it really gives you some good action steps. And like, you want to then go and attack it and not make that same mistake again. And you want to find the answers.
I think it's a great point. And I think that this is, I think that it's a very, very important point. And it's also one of the reasons why I realize this in retrospect, why so many people contributed their regret, because the thing about emotions, and particularly negative emotions, is that emotions are abstract. They're amorphous. They don't really allow you to act. That's why people sometimes find them as sort of traps. Now, that's also what makes positive emotions feel so good, but it's what makes negative emotions feel so bad. It's sort of like vaporous. But if you talk about your regret, or there's even evidence showing if you write about your regret for 15 minutes a day for 3 days, what you do is you convert that abstract emotion into concrete words. And that makes it easier to make sense of them. And to your point, Jamie, take action on them. But you can't take action on vapor. You can't like stand on a cloud. You need to turn that emotion into something concrete that you can work with and move on from.
Yeah. So I'm sure the people that are listening that know my background, I was a head coach at Siena College. We were doing an amazing job. We had a kid named Jalen Pickett, who's one of the big, he's one of the best players in the country right now at Penn State. And I left Siena to come to GW. Within 3 years at GW, I'm on forced sabbatical going into the 4th year. And I'm sure people are like, well, I'm sure, like, does he regret that? And until I read your book, I was like, I learned what I need to learn. There was a financial portion to it that I benefited from, just the natural things. And it's like, it's okay to say you regret making that decision. It's okay to say that. And by saying that, like, you really empower yourself to evaluate why you made the decision, what parts do you regret most. And what I think most people think, people say, well, you regret getting fired. Well, it's like, in this business that can always happen,
Right.
That's part of it. You maybe regret the questions you didn't ask, or you regret there might've been something said and you didn't take it to heart as much as you should have in that
Amen.
moment, or, and so there's a lot of things that really help me to evaluate sort of, and some of those things worked out well for me in other spots. And in this situation, I wasn't detailed enough to know, but now I know.
Exactly. And so this is exactly how one should deal with regret. So some of us say, no regrets. No regrets. I always look forward. I never look backward. I'm always positive. I'm never negative. That's a bad idea. But it doesn't help you learn and grow.
Yeah.
What's also a bad idea, though, is the sort of the 180 degrees from that, which is beating yourself up. Oh my God, I'm so horrible. I can't believe what an idiot I am. This is is wallowing. That's a bad idea too. What you want to do is you want to just confront it. Let's go back to your point about analytics. It's analytics. It's data. Yeah. It's information, and you need to use that. And I actually think that coaches and athletes, in some ways, might be better able to deal with their regrets, if only because there is the kind of the ethic and practice of watching game film. And so you watch game film. It's like, okay, you totally, there was some, you ran the play wrong. There was somebody wide open and you didn't hit him with the pass. Look how easily you got boxed out on that rebound. And nobody wants to go, watch their mistakes, but you actually do, because if you don't ignore them and don't wallow in them, you say, oh, okay, I got to put my feet in a different place. Oh, okay, I got to improve my peripheral vision. Oh, I got to get better at dribbling with my, on the weak side. And so, and that helps. And so I think that athletes and coaches probably are a little bit better at that, because they're used to really analyzing their mistakes.
Yeah. And I'd add, I think one of the concepts you sort of introduced to work with regret, we kind of hit on it just a little bit there, but it's about imagining you're basically on a journey. You're never finished. You're never finished. You're always learning. You're always aware. Right. So I thought that was a really great concept to talk about.
There's some really good evidence on that. Jennifer Ocker at Stanford has some really good research on the idea that when we come in with a journey mindset, that it's a little bit it sounds a little zen-like. But if we come in with a journey mindset, we actually can often end up reaching our destination and achieving our goals more easily than we come in with a sort of a single-minded a destination mindset. Now it's weird. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but there's other evidence of that. There's other evidence of that in some of the motivation research that, at some level, like, if you focus on being excellent, focus Focus on getting better. Focus on improving your process and not getting obsessed over outcomes all the time because you don't have full control over those. That is often the best way to achieve that outcome. We see that. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about this. You see this in a number of different realms. You see this in Carol Dweck's work on mindset, where you think about it in school. You have what are often called their learning goals and performance goals. Okay, performance goal is getting an A. A learning goal is mastering the material. And what we know is that if you hit a learning goal, if you hit a performance goal, it doesn't mean that you've learned anything. It means that you've performed. Whereas I'm a classic example of that, because I took 6 years of French in high school and college, got straight A's in French, and I can't speak French because all I cared about was getting the A on the quiz rather than learning how to speak French. And so there's some other interesting research and motivation about West Point grads, so that the grads who succeeded the most were the grads who came there saying, "Why are you going to West Point?" Some of them, it's like, I got a free education and it looks good on my resume. Others of them are, I want to serve my country. Others of them are a mix. And it turned out that the people who had those very pure motives, who weren't really after anything except for serving, they did the best. And so there's this weird thing about, if we focus on process, we focus on basic excellence, not always, but often the outcomes take care of themselves.
Yeah, I remember this movie that came out when I was younger, Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Oh, yeah. That chess prodigy named Josh Waitzkin.
Some of our listeners are going to maybe have to go and Google this.
Yeah.
But he was just such a child prodigy at playing chess. And every time he made a step, they would give him, this is kind of moving into Drive now, but every time he achieved something, they would give him a certificate. And then they get to a certain point where he's the best in the world. There's no more certificate to be given. And he still wants a certificate every single time. And his instructor just gets so mad at him. He just starts ripping him out of the page and throwing them at him. And I think that struck me so strongly, because I think you can really get caught up on that. He wasn't worried about perfecting. He was just worried about getting another certificate. And so he was so short-term. His mindset was so short-term that he couldn't really focus on just being the best he could become. And I think talking about journey mindset is about that. It's about, and I would always say this in recruiting, we're going to need everybody on this team to get from one side of the coast to the other side of the coast. We're trying to go from the East Coast to the West Coast. And you're going to need everyone along the way to be able to give us something different.
And that's interesting.
And it's about it's not knowing what we're going to need at the beginning. We just know we're going to need all these resources and all these tools at some point, but you don't necessarily know when they're going to present themselves, because you're going on a journey, and we've never gone coast to coast before, through the wilderness, over the mountains, over the rivers. And so having this mindset has always been something I've really been a big believer in, because it just preaches about always being ready and always trying to get better.
Exactly. Because I think that, again, one of the things, I'll give you one other tidbit from the book that I think lands on this, is that in the public opinion survey, the quantitative piece of the research, I asked people a question. I said, do you generally believe that people have free will, that have control over what they do, how they do, and so forth? So, and most, I think we had something like 80% of people saying, yeah, I have free will. And then we also asked people at a different part of the survey, do you think that in life everything happens for a reason, meaning purely fatalistic view of the universe? And we got 80% of people saying yes. Yeah. Okay, and so the lawyer in me, wanted just to rip out my hair because it was a contradiction, but then I stopped and said, wait a second, maybe there's something to this, that part of living a good life is realizing, hey, there's some things that I can control and other things I can't control. And if I completely wig out over things I can't control, it's not only useless, it's more than useless, it's detrimental. So what I need to do is I need to focus what I can control, what I can control. And I've become more and more convinced of that if you just focus on what you can control and you pursue excellence consistently over time, it's going to work out for you. Yeah. Not everything is going to work out, because that's not how life is. And sometimes shitty things happen, and sometimes there's bad luck, and sometimes you do a great piece of work and it doesn't get traction, and that's life. But there's some things you can control and other things you can't. And so as long as you can control, as long as you focus on being excellent at what you can control, the better off you are.
Yeah, no, it's all great stuff. I mean, it kind of all, leads into each other. And that's why I enjoyed Regret, because I felt like all the stuff we're talking about, Carol Dweck, and, we got all these people, Brene Brown, we've got all this research based stuff that we can look at and listen to, but no one had talked about regret. And I was like, man, this really sort of completes it in some ways, and gives you something that we hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's my goal.
Let's talk about drive a little bit.
Sure.
I've got to put together a basketball team at some point here. What's the best way to do that, to have autonomy, purpose, and mastery?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't want to give coach the kid who was cut from a 7th grade team is probably not going to be the best basketball advisor here. But if you think about it, so here's what the research what it tells us is that these kinds of, what you were talking about with Josh Waitzkin, basically saying, if you win this chess match, I'll give you a certificate. Okay. Yep. That's a contingent reward. And what the research tells us pretty clearly is contingent rewards, if you do this, then you get that, are pretty effective for simple tasks with short time horizons, but they're less effective for complex tasks with longer time horizons, which is what, a lot of sports is. And so instead, what you want there is you want a regimen where people are being treated fairly, treated well, and have a measure of autonomy, a measure of mastery, and a measure of purpose. Now, autonomy is basically, do you have some control over what you do, how you do it, when you do it? And so in basketball, I think it's, in a team sport, you don't want, pure autonomy all the time. Yeah. But what you want, though, is you want people to have a sense that, especially that they can speak up, that they necessary if they need to take action. Mastery is are you getting better at something that matters? Are you endlessly pursuing excellence, which I think is key? And then purpose, I think, is really important, and with in basketball. So the purpose, I think, is more than simply getting the W. I think the purpose in basketball is, at some level, if you focus the purpose on, am I making my teammates better? Yeah. I think you have winning teams who do that.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of tied this into like my best teams. And
how so?
So you look like autonomy, and there's things you can do for autonomy. Like, let's say, you've got 55 meals you got to plan through the course of the year. And I don't care what these guys eat or don't eat, right? Like, it might be 55 meals that, sometimes it's just you guys need to eat. You let those guys pick what meals they want. Yeah. You let them have control over that. Having control of the music that they play in the locker room, and the music they play in practice, or, hey, we got 4 sets of uniforms. Which ones you guys want to like? Fantastic. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. Awesome. Where they can, where they're going to live at, right? Like, hey, you're living. I don't care where you guys living on campus, but you got to live with a teammate. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think those are some ways that you offer autonomy that a lot of places would just say, no, you two guys are living together. We're wearing these uniforms. We're eating this food, and this is what we're doing. And you're going to just sort of stay on this path. I think we talk about mastery, and autonomy and mastery a little bit blend, because, like, let's say mastery, it's like, how often can I be in the gym? How often can I get in and work on my game? I might want to work on it at midnight. I want to work at 6 a.m. Great point. I'm not going to be limited about the ability to be able to do that. Do I have the best coaches around me that can help me be the very best? I'm a big guy. All my coaches here are 6'2". I'm 7'2". Do I have someone here that can help me be my very best? And then purpose, I've always felt like trying to connect it to something bigger, much bigger. I never thought about, like you just said, being the best teammate. I never thought about that. I always thought about it more as connect them to a larger commitment in the community. Okay. But I like yours, because yours.
Well, but here's the thing. It's interesting you say that, Jamie, because on the book Drive, when I have a whole chapter on purpose, and I didn't quite get it right. I have to say, like I now, as I've 10 years later, think about purpose not as one thing, but as two things. And I think we're both describing those two things. That when I originally wrote about purpose, I had purpose as like a big transcendent thing. I'm solving the climate crisis. I'm feeding the hunger, or something like that. And there's no question that the evidence shows that That kind of purpose is a performance enhancer. But there's another kind of purpose. Again, let's go off the basketball court into just a regular office. There's another kind of purpose, which is just simply, are you making a contribution?
Yeah.
Are you helping one of your colleagues get a project out the door? Are you helping a customer resolve their issue? And I think that they're both. I think that they're both super important. I think sometimes it's hard to make, the leap, from, it's 3 minutes into the second half and you're down by 4 points to say, oh, well, what can I do to serve my community?
Yeah.
I think that, and I think that's true in the regular workplace too. I think that, but thinking through, it's like, okay, what does my team need from me right now? How can I contribute to this team right now in this situation? How can I be the player on the floor who is making my teammates better? And I think that's purpose too.
Yeah. We had this group of guys when I was at Siena, and like we talked about, I was like, man, that group fit this so well. So we'd be at halftime, and at halftime, talk about autonomy. People would think our halftime stuff, we come out and play pretty well. People would be surprised. And they say, what'd you say to them at halftime? Did you yell and scream at them? And we literally go in at halftime and I say, offense, defense. All right, you guys tell me what we need to do. And the players tell me what we need to do better. And it's a little unorthodox because, I'm supposed to be, and we have our thing. Coaches have their thing, but we let them go first. And then even our managers would speak up at Siena.
Wow.
And
that's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, like the manager doing all the stats was like, Coach, we're not boxing out. They would jump up there.
Yeah.
And the players didn't look at the managers sideways. They took it in. And I was like, man, was this like one of the best environments we could have had? Because everyone felt that sense of purpose and everyone worked together and everyone knew what the purpose was and the drive was. It was really unique looking back on it, like how close we were to that.
But there's also 40 years of psychology beneath that technique, which is essentially that what we know pretty well is that when people have their own reason for doing something, okay, so there's a different. So the big enemy. The thing about let me come back at this a different way. We talk about autonomy, a mushy kind of concept. To me, sometimes with these abstract concepts, the way to understand them is to think about what is the opposite. Okay. Right. And the opposite of autonomy is control. Mm-hmm. And people have only two reactions. Human beings, forget not basketball players, human beings have only two reactions to control. They comply or they defy. And on a basketball court or in an office or in a classroom, you don't want people who are purely compliant all the time. You don't. Right. You certainly don't want people who are defiant all the time. You want people who are engaged. And the way that people engage is by getting there under their own steam, by having some sovereignty, by having some say. Now, so that's important. So what we also know is that when people you see this in goal setting, when people are able to set their own goal, participate at least in setting their own goals, they're more likely to meet them. When people have their own reason for doing something, they believe those reasons more deeply and adhere to the behavior more strongly. So that technique of saying, what do we need to do is it's not some kind of, again, go back to analytics. It's not some kind of woo-woo approach. It's basically, there's decades of social psychology, some personality psychology saying, if you want people to do something, let them come up with the reason for doing it themselves, because they will believe that reason more deeply and they will actually follow the behavior more resolutely.
Yeah, no, it's a really neat, it's like a neat little life hack.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I think it goes beyond hack. I think it's basically fundamental to, I think it's fundamental. And I think that good teachers, good bosses, good coaches have an intuitive sense of that.
Yeah.
That you want to bring, people in. This is not an argument for, purely flat hierarchies in businesses. This is not a hierarchy. This is not an argument for saying, oh no, coaches not as an authority figure. What you want is something that is, you want something that is participatory, that has accountability, you can merge participation and accountability very easily.
Yeah, and it drives
the other thing. The other thing is like who you got how many players on the Siena team? Like
16.
16. Okay, so here's the thing: you have 2 eyes. That's 32 more eyes on the game.
Yeah,
they might be seeing something that you aren't seeing.
Right, and we're usually like seeing. It's very rare they say something that we weren't seeing. Right, like we're usually all on the same page.
Yeah,
and so it's just about having just empowering those voices to be able to step up.
There's also some research. I mean, it's incredibly important in any kind of business. It's a work largely of Amy Edmondson at Harvard on what's called this stuff on psychological safety, which is do people feel free to are people able to take a small risk, a sensible risk? Are they able to speak up without getting their head handed to them? And so, I think that in some ways we've been seduced a little bit by this kind of almost this very, very, very old school view that the best leaders are screamers. The best leaders, yell at people, dominate people, control people, somewhere between, Vince Lombardi, Bobby Knight, and General Patton.
Yeah.
When in fact, I think that in business, but also in sports, the best leaders are, you got people like, in football, you got Pete Carroll. In basketball, you got people like Brad Stevens and Monty Williams in the NBA, they're not screamers. They're empathetic. They're authoritative, but not authoritarian. They're empathetic, but they're not pushovers. And I think that those kinds of things are in women's college basketball, like if you look at Dawn Staley, or you look at like Trish Vanderveer, I mean they're incredible coaches.
Right. I think and I think what's great about it is like when you recognize that you can drive the performance better. And there's really not, I've led both ways. I think when I first started out, I was a little more authoritarian.
Yeah.
And along the way, I was like, I really don't love this. I don't love how I feel. I don't love how I make the guys feel. It's a lot of energy to be that. And along the way, it's like, if you do it right, everyone's giving everyone energy.
Exactly.
Everyone's picking everyone up. Everyone's really committed to what you've got to be able to do. It's just like a better way. And then when I was actually writing this the other day for a speech, it like everyone overachieves. Like rarely in that situation does anyone underachieve.
Interesting.
You don't look back and go, man, this guy, it's like the environment allows everyone at whatever level they're at to have a level of achievement.
Interesting.
And to feel really good about it.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I think that also the other thing is in sports, you have, everybody is contributing in their own way. So, if you have the, you look at like the Philadelphia 76ers, I'm more of an NBA fan than a college fan, but if you look at the 76ers, you have Joel Embiid and you have James Harden, they're the marquee players, but whoever the 12th man is on that bench is showing up for practices and defending against, helping James Harden get better. And they're all, everybody. And when people know, and we see this a lot in business and once again, evidence-based, is that when people know how their individual actions contribute to a larger whole, they do their job better. Yeah. They like it better. It's, it's energizing. It brings energy from that person to the rest of the team.
Yeah. It's so unique when the team experience on a pro level isn't about the money that the guys are making, but it's about achieving something that they could only do together. And it's why I think when, you have these great teams like the Warriors who are all making, they all make good money.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't play the game by their contract. You watch a lot of teams that will play the game based off their contracts. So if I'm making the most money, I'm going to take the worst shots. I'm going to have the worst attitude. It's okay. But the Warriors are a great example. And the Spurs, a few years ago were a great example where, you might not know how much money anyone's making the way they play the game.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about that, Jamion, is that the NBA, stick with the NBA for a second, or the MLB, or the NFL, the NHL. Um, in you have in American workplaces this move toward greater and greater transparency of salary, but
Yeah.
in professional sports, it's already there.
Yeah.
Like you're like in offices, at some insurance company down the road, you're sitting in your cubicle and there's somebody else sitting in their cubicle over there. You don't know how much that person's making. But if you're playing for the Warriors or for the my beloved but hapless Washington Wizards, what the other players are making,
Yeah.
and theoretically that shouldn't affect your level of effort. I mean, you should, and it doesn't. And anyway, it's interesting. Sports is interesting because when you have people talking about salary transparency, saying that'll never work, it'll cause dissension in the ranks.
Yeah.
I'll say, well, take a look at professional sports. Like you have
Yeah.
these team sports where everybody knows each other's salaries, and sometimes the discrepancy, especially in a place like the NBA where there's a salary cap, is huge.
Yeah. I think it's transparency with that would make the workplace better.
I think it could, and I think it could also make it fairer.
Yeah, as the guy who's paying it, I've got to make sure that I am being fair, that the people that are doing the most work are being compensated for that.
People who are making the biggest contribution.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who makes the NBA is obviously an incredibly talented athlete, but if you look at on the whoever think about who the 12th man is on the Nuggets and Jokic. All right, Jokic contributes more. That's okay. Yeah. But if that 12th man on the bench knows what he contributes, that's good too. But it's probably fair that Jokic makes more than the 12th man on the bench.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about we were talking a little bit before we were on air about NIL, and I actually sent your drive metric over to a buddy yesterday because I felt like everyone's so locked in on name, image, and likeness and just throwing millions of dollars at players. And I sent it to him to say, just make sure you're taking care of these things. Talk about autonomy and make sure you're making the players' lives better, that you're still giving them ability to master their craft and still giving them a sense of purpose. Which again, when you talk about baseline rewards, if everyone's getting some sort of NIL or whatever, and so I just sent it to him and I said, I think you should keep these things in mind as you're trying to build an NIL program within your athletic department.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against NIL because I think in part because it's fair.
Yeah.
If these young athletes are delivering enormous revenue for their school, and they're not getting a cent, that doesn't seem fair to me. I do think that it has the potential to spin out of control, and I think we've seen that already. There are a few football players who have announced their intent to go to school one, and then the NIL deal falls through as they go to school 2, and then that thing falls through and they go to school 3, and it's like, oh man, this is just not, this is just not the way to be when you're 18. It's like this. It's and it presents a chance. And there's also a degree of with some of these schools with these big booster programs and a lot of money on the table. I think it could have a dampening effect. I mean, you made the good point when we were talking earlier off air about Texas A&M with this massive NIL program, but not much in the way of not a winning record to show for it.
Right. Just because you have the most money, like the human dynamic tells us that just because you have the most money doesn't mean you're going to have the best life, doesn't mean you're going to be the happiest. I think it kind of ties all in all the stuff we've been talking about today. It's like you still got to make sure you're accounting for the human dynamic in all these. And
Absolutely.
not just over indexing in one. And the teams that had the most NIL in football, at least, didn't win. They are all coming up short. And I think and I would say as an outward observer, it's because they're expecting the money to fill in all the gaps for all the problems that you have in the human dynamic. And you still have to handle those as a program.
Could be. And the other thing again, there's sometimes a tension between fairness, but also it's like, is this person coming to this school because it's simply the school that offered them the most NIL money, or is this person coming to this school because he or she loves the program, loves the teammates, wants to be part of a big tradition, and if it's simply, it's not, I think that the decision to go to college and think about, them as students, the decision to go to college is different from where to go to college is different from, where can I get the best deal on a toaster oven? Those are two different decisions,
Right.
And if you're making your decision about where to go based only on how much you're gonna earn, I'm not sure you're attracting I'm not sure the coaches and teams are necessarily attracting the best people, the best kinds of teammates. And I'm not sure that's the best way to begin navigating your life when you're 18 years old.
Yeah. No, excellent point. Well, we got one last thing we do here on last call. It's the end of the night. I don't know if you drink wine or you're a beer guy, but it's the end of the night in the last call. The bell's been rung. On the left side of you, you have someone who's retired. On the right side of you, you have someone who's still actively working.
Okay.
No family. What two people are you having with you on last call?
On the left side, the retired person is I think that I want Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that guy has led such a good life. He was president, and we look at some of our other former presidents, and that's kind of, the truth is like Obama, Clinton, George W. Bush, they haven't done much in their post-presidency.
Right.
They've kind of like coasted. And Jimmy Carter, he's like 100 years old. He's still out there building houses. And it's like, God bless you. It's like, I want to be like that. Like, I want to be 100 years old and wake up in the morning, as I think Jimmy Carter does, and saying, I got to do something.
Yeah.
Time's a wasting. Let's go. Let's build some houses. Let's do something. Let's negotiate some peace treaty somewhere. And I just absolutely admire that. Like, the former president can coast, and no one would criticize them. And this guy's been a former president for 40 years, and he hasn't coasted at all. He has just brought it constantly. And I just want to be like that, and I want some advice on that. Yeah. So that's on the left side.
Yeah.
On the right side, on the right side, it's going to sound silly, but I might want Oprah.
Why so?
Because, okay, well, here's why. So Oprah, I was interviewed by Oprah once.
How much fun was that?
It was awesome.
That's the dream right there. If you get it by Oprah, that's.
But here's the thing: is like this person is a professional. She was a great interviewer. She was totally prepared. That's the thing. She's like an athlete. She was totally prepared. I've had people, like obviously when I'm talking to you, like you're interviewing about a book and you've read the books, okay? But not everybody does that. And she had not only read the book, she knew it inside out. She asked really, really good questions. But what I like about Oprah is that she has been able to kind of, I feel like with her, she's had a big impact on people's lives and an extraordinary commercial success, both, but still be like a decent human being. Yeah. And there aren't that many people. Honestly, there aren't that many people like that. Yeah. In my life, having, and all the things that I've done and working in politics and blah, 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 like I've met a decent number of like well-known people, and some of them are not very impressive, and some of them are assholes. And forgive me for that word. And it's like, here's this person who has been as famous as anybody can be, and yet is still delivering, affecting people's lives, doing well financially, obviously, but also just being like a decent human being. And so I guess it's those two kinds of, role models. So I like the question. So that's who I would want to have last call with: Jimmy Carter and Oprah.
I love it. They both speak to the humanitarian side of you, and
I guess so, in a way that I didn't really realize. Yeah,
I think Jimmy Carter also had the highest IQ of any president. I believe that's right.
Could be. I mean, he was a Naval Academy grad. It could have been. Yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of smart presidents. I mean, Obama's a smart guy. Clinton's a very smart guy. Nixon was a smart guy. So you just never know. Smarts is not Smarts is not enough.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it so much.
What a pleasure. I really enjoyed it, Jamion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.